You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people to enjoy, to fight climate change and to help wildlife thrive.
Today's Woodland Walk actually starts in my kitchen. So that is the sound of my bread dough. And I am making bread in honour of the forest. I'm going to Hainault Forest on the outskirts of London. It's about an hour or so's drive from here. I'm just kneading my bread as I'm talking. And the reason I am making bread, it's all in honour of the fact that Hainault Forest used to supply all the wood which fired the bread ovens of London. And therefore, I'm making some bread before I go there in honour of the trip. And just a quick culinary note, during lockdown, my wife and I got mad into sourdough bread. We've been making sourdough at all hours of the day and night, and as a result I'm now on a diet. So a quick tip, this bread is a flat bread made with 100 grams of plain flour and 100 grams of low fat or no fat natural yogurt. You just mix it out, you mix a little dough, you spread that out, and it makes sort of two flatbreads, two large pita breads, which you dry fry. So you just put them on a sort of hot frying pan, and they sort of bubble up and make two very nice little breads. Anyway, there we are, some cooking tips for you, some bread for when my wife arrives back home from work, and it fuels me to head off to Hainault Forest and meet the Woodland Trust guys there. Well, I've arrived at Hainault Forest and I'm going to meet Jonathan Jukes, who is the site manager, and George Lewis, who is the development officer here. So I am going to meet, I've forgotten who I'm meeting first. I'm going to meet George Lewis first. So I've just got to find a guy with a Woodland Trust badge.
So what we're walking in now is one of the finest remnants of the ancient Forest of Essex. So formed in the 12th century by the Normans, this vast area covering most of the county of Essex was protected by the Crown as the Forest of Essex, and over time a lot of that forest was lost. But what we have here has stood as part of that forest under a variety of names until our walk here today.
Right.
So Forest of Essex was the wider forest, which was very much a forest with a capital F.
Right.
So it wasn't all woods and trees, but it was an area that was protected by the Crown, mainly for the collection of taxes, protecting the beasts of the chase, which is
Beasts of the chase.
Beasts of the chase. So
Wow.
mainly that was
venison
and deer.
Right. What? So the beasts of the chase. So the people used to hunt them.
The Crown did. They were the only people with the rights to.
Right.
And if you touched any of their deer,
Right. You got in trouble.
you got in a lot of trouble.
Right. Are we going to see any deer today?
We might do.
Oh, there are still deer.
There are plenty of deer.
Wow. The Crown doesn't hunt them. We're not likely to see the Queen
No.
riding through this morning.
No. And riding through hunting is a bit of a misnomer.
Right.
A lot of their hunting was done with other people chasing the deer towards them while they sat pretty
Oh, really?
on a tower,
a cup of tea.
just in the middle of a ride.
Right. Okay.
Deer came to them, and then it was easy pickings.
Right.
No, but the important bit of the history is, well, all the history is important, but the very interesting point is mid-19th century, what was left of Hainault Forest had its rights removed. So the Crown had it for all that time, but an Act of Parliament came in called the Disafforestation of Hainault Forest Act 1851,
Right.
and that claimed Hainault Forest back, and the Crown was reimbursed, and 100,000 trees were ripped out in the space of 6 weeks.
Why did they do that?
So this was about the expansion of a hungry London.
Okay. So this forest was grubbed up. It was
grubbed.
it was destroyed
Yeah.
to cope with an expanding London. But we are, I mean, I should just say, we are walking quite a magical bit because it's a frosty, still morning, and the sun is casting light right through the trees, and we are surrounded by trees. So when was it replanted, or did they not get it all?
So they didn't get it all. So this remnant here fell under the Lambourne parish. So we parked in the Lambourne car park. But with this Disafforestation Act, there was it led to a community uprising led by this gentleman called Sir Edward North Buxton, who was a verderer.
What's a verderer?
He helped manage Epping Forest.
Right.
So he was a forest official. But it stirred in him and the local community a need for conservation of the woodland. And at this time it was a lot more about woodland for recreation. So when we talk about woodland conservation now, we talk about biodiversity and people. Back in mid-19th century, very much conservation was about protecting the spaces that people need to relax, to go on holiday. So for EastEnders, they'd be coming out in carts at the weekend, their few days off, and exploring the forest. But Edward North Buxton managed to purchase some of the area that we're in now, but convince Parliament that we needed more of Hainault Forest.
Right.
And a really interesting part of this moment, this conservation moment, were the sort of two sides. People were split. So in the newspapers, you can look through the records and you can see people arguing that Hainault is important for recreation. It's needed. It's where we've spent every summer or one weekend a year exploring. And then there's people demanding that there is no use of the forest. So
that it's useless.
That it's wasteland.
Why have it?
It's scrub.
Might as well build a city on it.
If it's not producing food, and at this point, timber was less of a priority. Right. So it's not producing timber for shipbuilding. What's it doing? Let's grub it up. Luckily, Buxton and his pressure managed to save what's left. But it's such a special woodland.
And so how much of the woodland was saved then?
So there's about 350 acres that we manage.
And how much was it before it started being grubbed up?
We're talking thousands of acres.
Right.
So
really this is only a fraction of what it was.
It's a tiny fragment, but the Woodland Trust has, over the last 23 years in our management, acquired 2 extensions.
Right.
So most recently I was out in November with 1,000 local community groups, volunteers, and we planted 20,000 trees. So we're claiming back or replanting some of that lot.
Right. And so 1851, you get this real uproar, that the local public going, well, we're not having any of that, we want to save it. I just wonder how early that was in the sort of conservation movement. Was conservation a word then? Was that part of a theme, or was that really one of the first signs of British conservation?
It's very much an initial moment. It's sort of a kick-starting. So people who were involved with that, the fury of Hainault being grubbed up, Edward North Buxton went on to form the Commons Preservation Society. They went on to save Epping Forest. They went on to form the National Trust. And on his deathbed, Edward North Buxton purchased the last large fragment of the Forest of Essex. So we have Hainault, managed by us. We had Epping Forest, that was purchased by the City of London, and then there's Hatfield Forest up near Bishop Stortford. Right. And that third and last fragment was purchased by the gentleman that saved Hainault and bequeathed to the National Trust.
So, I mean, not to overstate it, but you seem to be saying, I mean, this is historically important, not only in terms of the biology here, but in terms of politically, this is where the British conservation movement began.
Yeah, this is the moment. This is the place.
That's really true. This is it.
You know, Kenneth Watkins back in 1972 might not have started the Woodland Trust if there wasn't the history that was started here.
And more than woodland, it sounds like the sort of sense of conservation, the importance of the natural world, and that place in the political argument, that all started where we're standing now.
Started here because we lost so many trees, and the local community stood up to save what was important.
Well, that is amazing, isn't it? And how involved are the local community now here?
Well, you can see from the car park.
Yes, loads of dog walkers. I mean, with the dog walkers, I think this is really important. I can tell. But if you haven't got it, I mean, how clearly it was very important to the locals then, and not only the locals, the East Enders used to come out here. Yeah. This was sort of the holiday. Yeah. You know, you come out to Hainault.
Since the forest reopened in 1906, it has been a favourite location for people of East London to come out, and that continues. You know, I ran 7 tree planting events back in November, a couple months ago, and it was a problem of managing the numbers of people that came rather than trying to encourage people to come along.
So look, we're going to meet Jonathan, who's managing the forest. He was with us. We've lost him already.
He's got important things to
do. He's off managing. Hopefully we'll find him. But in the meantime, why don't you take me to your favourite tree, if it's not too far away, or one of your favourite trees, and tell me about that.
It's a longer walk than.
It's a longer walk.
We're actually a good-sized forest.
Okay.
But I've got many favourite ones, so we can walk back up to.
Tell me about, whilst we're walking to your second favourite tree, tell me about your favourite tree and why is that?
It is my favourite tree, and it is a veteran hornbeam, of which Hainault has about 5,000 veteran hornbeams. And by veteran I mean they are of an age where they are creaking and losing limbs. Right. And this particular tree has split apart, and it looks like the spirit of the forest is reaching out and saying, I'm going to protect this forest, don't come near me. So it's a spooky, a scary tree.
Right. Wow.
But it's what I particularly like about it is how it's come apart. You can see straight through it, but it's still bursting with new life.
Well, that's brilliant. How old would it be, do you reckon?
Oh, we're talking hundreds of years.
Fantastic. So look, lots going on. Even now, in the middle of winter, it's buzzing around here.
Yeah, it's not just dog walkers.
It isn't just dog walkers. We're passing quite a few people, but it's big enough to get lost in.
It's big enough to get lost in. Although once I put in my new trails, hopefully it'll be harder for new visitors to.
So you're putting in trails so people can follow paths.
We'll be putting in some new trails. So when you come back to visit our visitor centre, we'll test you on the new trails, see if you get lost.
And when is the visitor centre opening?
We'll be opening it by October.
Now that's unusual for the trust, isn't it?
We don't have another manned visitor centre, but the opportunity to be so close to so many people with such an important woodland was you couldn't miss it.
And when does that open?
October.
Right, you always do things in winter, right? Yeah. Everything comes to. Well, and look, we're right by a sort of split tree.
This is
the one you were talking about.
Yeah. So look at that. You can see right through it.
Yeah, it's opened out into a little house. If I was a little slimmer, I might if
you could tuck in there for warmth.
If I think I got in there now, I might not get out. But anyway, well, that's fantastic. And we said we'd lost Jonathan, but we found him again.
We found him.
Look, he's looking. I think he's doing tree things. Brilliant. Great.
There are far more trees here than there were in its heyday, as it were, when it was a commoner's landscape. The forest was pretty much left to its own devices, and what's happened over 150 years or so is that the oak, and Hainault grows extremely good oak, and the hornbeams have seeded into these open areas, and they've all come up together. So we've got quite a sort of situation for overcrowding, and everything's going up for the light. The woodland floor in itself is pretty bare because there's no light getting through to it. And to help preserve the veteran trees, we need to work on them to stabilise them and to let light into the forest floor, which will increase the biodiversity of the woodland.
Right.
And it's about trying to give enough light to the old veteran trees that they continue to grow, but also to get light into the woodland floor, open up areas so that we've got glades, which is much more beneficial to woodland butterflies, bats, that sort of thing.
And what ecologically, what's special or different about this wood than others?
Well, because it's so ancient, really. I mean, it's what we're walking on that makes these areas really special. Is the fact the soil here has been relatively undisturbed. It's never been farmed. You know, the trees have only been here for, you know, at most sort of 400 or 500 years as individuals.
Yeah.
But it's that continuous cover as woodland and wood pasture, and the fact that these soils have been left pretty much unmolested,
Right.
that makes it so valuable. All the organisms that live in them, the fungal communities, that sort of, you know, everything like that. Then there's the realisation that this is just a remnant. This is just a tenth of what was here, and we've got over 6,000 pollard hornbeams in here, and it just staggers me to think of how active this, you know, this is a social landscape. So there would have been people working in here, you know, grazing cattle, pollarding, charcoal burning. There would have been so much going on here.
Yeah.
And that's still true today, whereas it's mainly recreational use, but it's still quite a busy place. And there's a dense understory of holly here. That's pretty much all there is, and that's interesting in itself because that was preserved as part of the king's, you know, the royal forest, because it was termed as the king's vert. It was what fed the deer through the winter.
Right.
So
The holly.
the holly did.
I didn't even know that. So deer eat holly.
Deer eat holly. Yeah, it's not always quite as. I mean,
Because it's quite sharp. I mean, especially at the lower branches, don't they? I thought holly leaves, you know, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here. I thought holly leaves at the bottom are sharp to avoid being eaten, and they sort of go softer as further up the tree.
That's often the case, so they're not quite so prickly. But I mean, when the shoots are new and young, animals will eat them, and of course they'll strip the bark in winter. I mean, that's what, you know, in hard weather, that's what deer, rabbits and hares do. We know what would happen if we do nothing, but what we're trying to do is to preserve the old trees for as long as possible by managing them, creating pockets within a dense woodland where there's light, where we can get a ground flora coming, and happens very quickly.
That's incredible, because I mean, we're looking at a tree which is split into three. It does look like something from a horror movie, like a witch would come out of that, and yet that is a living tree.
And I think with these is because we work on human scales. So, you know, we do this to a tree, we pollard it, and within 10 years it looks really awful because areas of it are rotting out. But what we don't know yet is that in 40, 50 years' time, that may split into three trees. But we've got pollards here that are still standing where they look like a tree as you approach them from one side, but we walk around the back and there's almost nothing there.
Right.
And you think, well, how is that standing? And you give it a good shake and it doesn't move, it's as solid as anything.
Right.
But with continual pollarding, you see, you know, that tree will grow on. And you know, they do, bless them, they do want to live forever. That's what's really nice about them. I mean, if you were saying to me, what would you like to see in 20 years? I'd like to see these areas being managed by a grazing herd that is based at Hainault.
Right.
You know, with the partnership project, you know, we could have our own grazing herd here that is moved out into the forest at particular times. I think then you've got like an area in front of us here, you see, which is almost devoid of pollards, and it's this mosaic of habitats over this area that will give it'll give the woodland resilience. It'll also improve it for the biodiversity here. And we noticed that with the areas with the pollards, that's where we find the spotted flycatchers. And if we could introduce animals into that landscape as well, which would boost the insect populations. I think you'd see the whole woodland will strengthen really.
There's an amazing tree right in front of us. What's this one?
That's a hornbeam pollard.
That's a hornbeam.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
It's very different. Looks very different from the other one.
The pollards in Hainault, a pollard is lower than a lot of the ones in neighbouring Epping Forest.
Right.
And I just wonder, I often, as I'm wandering around, I ponder to myself why that was. And I think you've got to think of how they would have pollarded these. And I think you're doing it, you'd have to carry a ladder with you. You don't drive a truck into the middle. So it will be a group of people, and they probably have made up their own little ash ladders from coppice wood around the forest. And you want it so you could carry it over your shoulder, and then you'd carry your axe in the other hand. Yeah. So you'd have a sort of 6 to 8 foot ladder, and you lean it up against the tree, swarm up, climb in there, and then cut it all off and drop it down, and then come back down and deal with it on the ground.
But why? I mean, why do people in other forests have longer ladders?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. But you go to Epping, and the pollards, particularly the beech pollards, are much higher.
Right.
And it's just one of those little things that intrigues me, and you probably never know the answer. But I think maybe Hainault just had this tradition of shorter ladders.
Right. That's very good. Very good. But as a boy, then, did you grow up? Did your parents work in this sort of area?
No, not at all. My father was a solicitor, but I was very lucky. I grew up on the south coast with miles of sort of coastal paths, woodland next to, and we were feral, my friends, and we just used to go and spend all our time out in these woods and on the coast. My father was very keen on sort of various aspects of wildlife. He was keen on a lot of wildflowers, particularly orchids, and he developed a friendship with the first warden there. And I mean, my first memory is going to see starlings roosting in these woods. And John Goodman, who was there, he carried me on his shoulders, and I'd never forgotten the fact that he had a badger came out of the woods and was trotting at his heels, and it was a badger that had been orphaned and he'd released, and it used to come back and find him. And the other thing was he had a parrot in a cage in the kitchen and a fox on the draining board, a fox cub, and that's just given me a lifelong interest in wildlife and nature. And I was very lucky to spend a bit of time with a really great naturalist called Chris Gibson, and his thing he drummed into me is you want bags of biodiversity. Don't manage for one thing. Create landscapes that are full of diversity, and wildlife will exploit it. It is the build it and they will come.
Well, what a fantastic place to work.
It's a poor excuse for work, really, isn't it? Even in the rain, it's very atmospheric. Right. But you can imagine on some of the paths we've got here, the highwaymen charging through, Roman legions marching through. You're so close to London. This has seen so much history. They're not so much trees. You go up and touch them, and some of the ones you think they're like time machines, what they've seen. And just still having them here, you can sort of feel that link with the past, and to have them still here and to be able to walk in them on a daily basis is just phenomenal.
Well, that was great fun and also really informative, and I should say if you want to visit Hainault Forest, or indeed any forest near you, you can find your local Woodland Trust site by going to this website address. It is woodlandtrust.org.uk/find-a-wood. That's woodlandtrust.org.uk/find-a-wood. Happy wandering.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Join us next month when Adam will be taking another walk in the company of Woodland Trust staff, partners and volunteers. And don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you're listening to us, and do give us a review and a rating. And why not send us a recording of your favourite woodland walk to be included in a future podcast? Keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes, and please tell us what makes your woodland walk special. Or send us an email with details of your favourite walk and what makes it special to you. Send any audio files to podcast@woodlandtrust.org.uk, and we look forward to hearing from you.